morning. My name is John Douglass, and I'm the archivist here at Lakeland Christian School. That means I am working to preserve the school's history, and we do that in a variety of ways, through newspaper articles, through publications that we put out as a school, through programs, various activities that go on here, memorabilia that we put together each year for different events, and yearbooks. And today I have the privilege of interviewing one of the principals from the very early days here at Lakeland Christian School. Last year we interviewed Evelyn Wheeler-Towler, who was the first principal, and this year the man who followed Evelyn was John Bechtel. And so John came in the summer of 1963 as a teacher, and then in January of 1964 John became the principal here and was here for a year and a half along with his wife Donna. So we're going to spend just a few minutes together today talking about those early days and get some perspective on what the school was like in those days. So I hope you enjoy our time together. John, I wonder if you would take just a few minutes to tell us a little bit about your upbringing. I know your story is pretty amazing. You have not a normal childhood as we think about it here in the United States, having grown up on the mission field and having parents that were missionaries. Tell us a little about what those days were like as a child, and then as you moved into middle school and high school. I know you had a lot of fun in those days with people your age, and give us a little background. Tell us where you grew up and what that was like.
Like everything you're wearing, I was made in China.
Okay.
My parents were missionaries in Hong Kong. They went to China in 1926. They moved to Hong Kong after my father was ill, and he went there to get taken care of, and they stayed there. And I was born in 1939, and at that time the world was at war with Japan, and the Japanese were on the border of Hong Kong, and they were imminently coming into Hong Kong, so all the women and children and the men as well were told to come down to the dock if you're an American and you're going to be taken to safety. So I was born, and when I was 18 months old, we all went down to that dock, and the captain came down from the ship that came to get us and said, "We only have room for one woman and all the children. Who has the youngest child?" I was the youngest child. So my mother took all the American children on this ship, left my dad on the dock, and we sailed to San Francisco. My dad was captured by the Japanese, put in a prison camp where he lost 90 pounds. 4 missionaries went in, he's the only one that came out. He was in there for a little over a year, traded for 4 Japanese officers. The first time I saw my dad, I was 4 years old, and I met him in New York when he came off the ship being repatriated from the Japanese prison camp. That's how my life started. And then my father went around the country speaking about his experience, so I didn't see him then either. And at 6 years old, my dad went back to China, left my mom and me here, and at 7 years old, I went over and joined them, got in the British school system, and graduated from high school in the British school system. I was on Hong Kong's international hockey team, grass hockey, field hockey, and as I was on Hong Kong's international cricket team. So my whole life was sports. And I ended up being the student body president of my school, called the head prefect. And I came from there by myself through Singapore, Aden, Egypt, Italy, Germany, and the rest of Europe, to Ireland, where my mother was from, and to New York, and a bus to Houghton College. And when I arrived there, I enrolled as a freshman in Houghton College in 1958. That's my life story.
Share just a little bit about what it was like in those years when you turned 7 and you grew up in China. You were living in Hong Kong at that time?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay, and so you, what were some of the things that you did during those days with the other children? You talked about sports. I thought you had some interesting stories about some mischief maybe that you got
Yes,
into.
I've been a mischievous person. I just spoke in chapel here, and there are about, I guess, at least 15 that I counted while I was speaking that weren't paying any attention to what I was saying. And I feel sorry for them because that was me. I could care less what the person up there was saying. And I had a lot of fun growing up. All of us spoke perfect Chinese because nobody spoke English in those days. When we would go to a restaurant with Chinese friends, they'd have to go in first and ask if it was okay to bring the foreign devil in to eat with them. That was me. And I had a lot of fun. I used to like to go hiking, and we'd hike around and come to villages and sleep in the villages, and they'd feed us their Hakka food, terrible stuff. And I played sports. I got every illness known to man. I got meningitis, cholera, malaria, and the flu. Everything came down from China. Tuberculosis, we all had tests on our arm that we all failed, and we had to get a shot in the shoulder. All that stuff, we all got sick all the time. And I lived in a Chinese community. All I did was speak Chinese, Cantonese.
Was the New Territories, was that part of where you lived as well? I'm a little confused.
I didn't live in the New, I lived in Kowloon Tong. The top, there's a mountain called Lion Rock in Hong Kong. I lived at the foot of that.
Okay.
My dad bought a house for $17,000 when he came out of prison. The mission sold it for $21 million.
Wow.
That's Hong Kong. Now, unfortunately, he bought it in the name of the mission, so I didn't see the $21 million. But we lived in that house, and he bought it cheap because that's where they executed Canadian soldiers. And the Chinese were afraid of the evil spirits. And the guy wanted to get rid of it. He bought it. I lived there my whole life, till I was 18, in that house.
When you came to the States and you went to Houghton, just share briefly about how you met your wife, Donna. I know that she didn't go to Houghton, right?
Right.
And so tell me just briefly how that happened.
Houghton was the biggest shock in my life because I'd gone through a British school system and I'd lived in a Chinese community in a big city. Houghton's out in the middle of nowhere. You have to swing out on a vine to get to Houghton. And I get to Houghton. You want to hear my first story in Houghton?
Sure.
They had a building called the Science Building. And the Science Building had places where on a staircase going into the Science Building, you could sit on the sides of it. So there were maybe 15 kids sitting there. And I came in my school uniform with a tie, white shirt, brown jacket, gray pants, and I showed up like that. Everybody else was dressed like normal Americans. They looked at me like I was crazy. So I'm sitting on these stairs, and a Pepsi-Cola man comes. And he gets out of his truck, and he fills his cart with Pepsi-Cola, and he bumps up the stairs, obviously puts them in a machine, and he comes back, and on his way out, he looks at one of the girls, and he said something very terrible that I wouldn't even say publicly about that girl. And in Hong Kong, all the girls in our school are like our sisters. I had never heard an insult like this. So I got up and I went down to him and I said, I'd like you to apologize to that young lady for what you just said. And he told me where to go. And I said, you must not have understood me. I'm going to say it one more time. Apologize to that girl. He said, no. What he didn't know was I was brought up in a school in Hong Kong where we had at least 2 fist fights every day. There wasn't a fist fight, it wasn't a school day. So I hit him as hard as I could. He fell flat on his back. I put my foot on his chest, and I said, now are you going to apologize to the girl? He did. I was a hero in Houghton College immediately. Everybody talks about that story till this day.
Wow.
So I started there. I had never been around that many foreigners. There were in my class there were 360 potential Mrs. Bechtels. In my class in Hong Kong there were 12 of them or something, you know. So I mean, I thought I died and gone to heaven at Houghton. I loved Houghton. I went there for 4 years, graduated. Recently I was alumnus of the year.
Great.
All my buddies are doctors. They're sitting out there wondering why they're not the alumnus of the year. So I love Houghton.
But Donna was not there, right?
Donna was not the first holiday, Thanksgiving. I had no place to go, so I stayed in the dorm. Christmas came and somebody took me home with them. But what am I going to do in the summer? So a guy came through recruiting people for Camp of the Woods in New York State. I'd never heard of such a place. So he told me they feed you, they give you a place to live, you have to work, and they pay you. I thought I died and gone to heaven, so I went there. And I worked there my whole life. I'm on the board there now. I've been on the board for 44 years or something. And I saw this beautiful girl from Kansas City, Missouri. But I didn't pay much attention to her because I had another girlfriend.
Okay.
But by the end of the summer, I had come to my senses. And her name was Donna Stanley. And she was the homecoming queen, the engineering queen, and every queen on earth at John Brown University. So she came to Camp of the Woods to work, and that's where I met her. And that's how we found out about Lakeland Christian School. You want to hear that?
I do. That's my next question.
Okay,
So
here
we're
it
right
is.
in there.
She and I were waiters. I was a waiter, and she was a coffee girl at Camp of the Woods. So we're having a nice lunch after we'd worked. And the director comes over and says to us, John and Donna, because we were an item at that point, we were engaged. John and Donna, a couple and their children have just come here. They missed the meal. Would you serve them a meal? So we went to serve this couple and their children a meal. And the couple was Dr. Walter Sly and his wife and family. So he's gregarious. And first thing he says to me, he says, "It's a beautiful girl who's your coffee girl. You ought to marry her." I said, "I am going to." So we became quick friends. And by the end of their 2 days there, he came to me and said, "What are you doing after college when you get married?" I said, "I'm not sure yet." He said, "I'm sure. You're coming to Lakeland to teach math and science in Lakeland Christian School." I said, "Oh no." I said, "I've got job offers all over the place. IBM's trying to get me, car dealerships, everybody in the world is trying to get me. Because I've been running Camp of the Woods these years. I know how to manage." He says, "God's called you to Lakeland, Florida. You know him, you can't say no." So I said yes. Couldn't believe it. I wasn't married yet. So we came down here.
You got married later that summer then?
Just a minute, I'm ready to tell you.
Okay.
We came down here, and he had a house for us to stay in on the corner.
Left field.
So on Labor Day, Labor Day, we drove to Jacksonville, Florida, and got married. We drove Dr. Sly's car, and he gave me some money because I had no money. When I came back here married, I had $7 left. I was in debt, $7 to Dr. Sly. And I wrote him a check. The first paycheck I got from Lakeland Christian School was not very much. And your dad was on the board. And I wrote him a check for $7, which was my debt to him. And I still have that check.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, so that's how we got to Lakeland. And we lived in that house. It was a brand new house. It's the only house in Lakeland that when you turned the light on in the bathroom, you got a shock. And the guy couldn't afford a tub, so he made the tub out of little square tiles. So when you got out of the tub, you have a mosaic on your back. Crazy place. And when there was a thunderstorm, lightning would go through the kitchen. Ding, ding, you could hear it going around. So every time there was a thunderstorm, we'd go out and sit in the car. It's crazy.
You must have spent a lot of time in the car.
We
here
did.
in Lakeland. So why did you feel that God was calling you here, or that really didn't come into play?
I think at that point I just needed a job and a place to go,
Yes.
and he was so nice to me. I mean, he talked me into coming here, basically. I mean, he had a way with talking.
So those early days you taught, what did you say, math and science?
Math and science.
And Donna also did some teaching, right?
She started as my secretary, and then she became a teacher in the 5th and 6th grade.
Okay. Describe a little bit, as best you can remember, about those days with some of the people, what that experience was like from the beginning, and then as you moved into being the administrator, maybe tell that story of how you got to that point. But what was it like? I mean, you know, things are so different now. Tell me a little bit about what you remember from those days.
Well, I remember coming to a little school, a very small school, and I'd come from a big school in Hong Kong. And I hadn't taken any teaching courses. I was an English literature major.
Okay.
So I had no teaching degree. Donna had a teaching degree, but I didn't. When we arrived here, I started teaching math and science. The main thing I look back on as the blessing from God when I moved here was the men on the board, which included your father. Those men were godly men who second mortgaged their homes to start this school. And those men poured their lives into my life and Donna's. Mrs. Sly to Donna, and Dr. Sly to me, and Jim Welch, and your dad, Mr. Douglass, Don Kelso, Robbie Robbins, Snyder. Those men were men of God. And I believe that my life changed more toward wanting to serve God while I was here. And Dr. Sly taught me how to win people to Christ. And when I learned that, I knew right away I was going to be a missionary. I knew this was where I was going to spend the rest of my life.
Could you tell a little of that story I heard you tell about that night when you went out witnessing?
Dr. Sly and Jim Welch, the city judge, used to go out every Tuesday night and pick a street, park a car, and start at one house and go down the street, going into every house telling the gospel. I never heard of such thing. So I thought that's the worst idea I ever heard in my life. So they came every Tuesday to get me, to go with them. And my wife, you know her, she said, oh yes, John would love to go. I didn't love to go. I didn't go. Finally, you know, I'm a newlywed. I want to please my wife, so I went to please her. We park a car over by one of the many lakes where the college is.
Okay. Florida Southern, maybe?
Florida Southern.
Okay.
Over there somewhere. And we go up to a house, knock on the door, and the lady comes out with curlers in her hair. And Sly says, I'm Dr. Sly. This is the city judge, Judge Welch, and the school principal, Mr. Bechtel. And the lady says, oh my God. He says, that's why we're here. We want to talk to you about God. Can we come in? Well, she couldn't say no, so we go in, and her husband's over here drinking the beer, watching the ball game. He says, who is it? And she says, a doctor, a judge, and a school principal. He says, oh, God! And Sly says, that's why we're here. So we sit down, and Dr. Sly says, Mr. Bechtel would like to tell you how you can know Jesus as your personal Savior. I almost passed out. I didn't know what to say. I'd been a Christian all my life. I'd been this, that, and the other in college and everything else, but I had never led anybody to Christ. I didn't know how to. Boy, I messed it up that night, and I got out of there. I said, I'm going home. Oh no, we're just getting started. I said, you're getting started. I'm going home. I walked home from wherever that was. It was a long walk. And on my way home, I did more business with God than I think I've ever done it since or before. I said, that's it. So I called Sly up the next morning in his clinic, or whatever you call it, and I told him, I got to learn from you how to do that. So we started meeting, and there's a Howard Johnson's on a lake somewhere here. we started meeting in the Howard Johnsons every week, learning how to bring people to Christ. So after I learned it, we're going out one Tuesday night, and there's a Publix up around the corner here from the school.
Yes.
I hope. Is it still there? Go out and turn right up the road a ways. Somewhere up there.
Somewhere.
So anyway, we stopped there for Mrs. Sly for some eggs. So I'm going over what I'm going to say, and a young boy is checking out, 15-year-old boy. All of a sudden I think, why don't I try it on him? So he comes over. I said, hi, how you doing? He says, fine. I said, I'm the school principal over here. He said, yeah, I know you are. I said, I'd like to talk to you about something. Do you have a minute? He said, yeah. So we went over to the side of the Publix, right outside the checkout, and I led that boy to, he prayed to receive Jesus in the Publix.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. They started coming to church with me in Kentucky Avenue Presbyterian Church. In order to pay me, the school had no money, so I was the youth director at Kentucky Avenue, and Donna played the organ. So I got this boy coming to church, and he's going to church and following Jesus. It works.
Wow.
Well, that changed my whole view of everything. I knew that's it.
That's what you wanted to.
I knew that was it for my life.
And I think I remember too that you mentioned another time that how when you got home, you and Donna kind of.
Yeah, I walked back home that night. Donna said, oh, you know, she's all smiling. Oh, did you have a nice time? I said, I had the worst time I ever had in my life. I said, but on the way home, I got it all straight now. Let's get on our knees. And Donna and I got on our knees in that house. And we recommitted our lives to Christ and said, we'll go anywhere in this world to serve you. I speak Chinese, but we're right at the school now. It's a desperate time here. We'll teach here for a while and then go. And then shortly after that, Evelyn Wheeler had a health problem, which is not my fault. You know, some people think maybe I caused it, but I didn't. And Dr. Sly took me for a ride in the car one day. And he said, I want to talk to you about something. And I thought, man, somebody died? Or, you know, why does he have to take me? And he takes me in his car, and we go somewhere, and we get out, we go in to have a cup of tea or somewhere. I don't know where we were. He says, Evelyn Wheeler's having some health problems. So I said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. He said, the board's met. You're now the new principal of Lakeland Christian School. I was 23, I just turned 23 years old. And I said, yeah. He said, no, you are. And I'd had an experience at Camp of the Woods I ran Camp of the Woods right under Mr. Purdy and stuff. So I took over, but they were the hardest 2 years of my life. Man.
Did you teach still some subjects then?
I still taught math and science.
Okay.
And we had a guy who I had dinner with last night. And I don't know if we want to name him or not, but he's a lot smarter in science than I was. And he'd always ask me questions. I was 2 days ahead of them in the book. And he'd ask me questions I didn't know the answer to. And so I'd say to him, Harold, I'd say, I can't believe you don't know the answer to that question. I want you to go home tonight, and by tomorrow in class, I want you to know the answer to that question. And then I'd go home and look up the answer to the question, and he'd have a better answer than I did. I told him last night, I said, you were way ahead of me. But I had fun with these kids. Mike, I had more fun with Mike. He followed me everything. We mowed the lawn.
Right.
We bought 2 buses, Volkswagen buses, and Dr. Sly, he said, what should we write on the side of them? I said, we should write Lakeland Christian School, and we'll call bus number 1 and number 2. He said, no, call it bus number 15 and number 17, so people think we have 17 buses.
That's right. That's right.
That's so good. That's Chinese. I mean, I thought, that's great. So I drove a school bus, mowed the lawn. The 2 Snyder kids picked up the garbage every night from the waste baskets. And Mike and I were in charge of all the lawn and stuff, and Mrs. Sly, oh man. I got to tell you about the football field.
Okay.
I'm with my new wife over in the house, and there's a field growing stuff between that and the school. So they had cut down the stuff, and we had bought the land. But it was rough from rows And it's hard to play ball when it's rough, you know. So I'm driving along one time, and I see this guy with a shotgun on the side of the road, and a bunch of guys down in the ditch working in the road with striped uniform. Well, I'm from Hong Kong. I didn't know what's going on. So I stopped. I came back to the guy and said, well, who are these guys? He said, they're prisoners. Oh, I said, well, that's why you're standing here with a gun so they don't run away. He said, that's why I'm here. I said, could these guys come over to that school around the corner and fix our football, our baseball field? He said, they love it.
Wow, I never heard that story.
He brought his team and another crew, road crew, 12 people, and 2 guys with shotguns outside our house, and my wife was petrified. She wouldn't even come out of the house. And they leveled the field, and it wasn't level, and the guard called the county to a friend of his, and the county brought dirt in to make it level. And they made the whole field, and you need a backstop. Those prisoners put up a backstop.
Oh my goodness, wow.
In front of our house, there was a backstop right there. And a baseball field, all done by prisoners free of charge. So they called it Bechtel Field.
Right.
And
had a sign up.
had a sign,
Yeah.
and all was going good with the Douglass sign until somebody came along with more money and built another big stadium. And the Bechtel, I don't know what happened to Bechtel Field, but it doesn't exist anymore.
It's now a gymnasium and parking lots.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, so mostly parking lot.
Anyway, that's how we got the field.
Yes.
And I got to tell you one more. The day that John F. Kennedy was shot,
Right.
we had scheduled a big football game against St. Petersburg on a city football field. We heard it on the radio while we're driving to the game. We got there, got both teams together, and we prayed. And we went to start the game. We didn't have a football. The school football had been lost. We had one ball. It had been lost. We called Dr. Sly. He goes to there was a store next to him, a hardware store that sold he bought a ball and brought it to the game.
All the way to St. Pete.
No, it was here.
Oh, it was here. Okay,
Yeah, it was here. It was down the street somewhere. There's a public ballpark. And Dr. Sly brought the ball, you know, that was a big, we all cheered. The game started.
Oh my goodness.
We had a lot of that kind of stuff. We had no money. Zero.
And you mentioned the difficult financial situation, and now board members took a second mortgage on their homes. Is there any other story about God's provision for the school? Maybe not so much financially. Maybe it's teachers. Was it difficult to get good qualified teachers to teach? Do you recall anything about that, or the personalities of some of those people?
I soon realized that the teachers we had were not up to the standard. So I told the board, we got to get better teachers. So they gave me a credit card and a car, Dr. Sly's car, and I drove to several colleges. Toccoa Falls College is one of them. In Toccoa Falls, we got 2 young ladies who both were qualified teachers. Then I had a buddy I went to, Jones, and I called him up, and he was a teacher. He's a smart guy. He's a teacher. He had a teacher degree, and his wife did. So I called them up, and they came. So we got 4 teachers right away, that way. And David Jones then became a missionary to Brazil. And the 2 ladies, I don't know what happened to them. And then we got another lady from Chattanooga who was a friend of Dr. Sly's. And we built up a pretty good staff. Mrs. Sornberger was the only one who stayed, who, I don't know if
Right.
everybody remembers her.
Oh, yeah.
She's the only one who stayed on from the old teaching staff. And my wife taught. So we had a whole new staff. I said, I can't do it with the people we have here now. They don't know what they're doing. They really didn't. And and I come from a very good school in Hong Kong, and I know how to run a school. So, I mean, I did my best. The school grew, and the rest is history. The Bible says, do not despise the days of small beginning.
Yes.
But we didn't despise them, and look at the place now.
That's amazing, amazing. You know, in those days, I mean, my wife came to teach here in 1969, and no air conditioning, no custodial service. You did your own PE, you taught the music, you just did everything. And so I know it was like that when you were here, because that was, 5 or 6 years before that. And so it was a time when there were very little resources to pay for those kinds of things. What did the students all bring their own lunch? There was no lunch program.
Well, there was a lunch program.
Was there? Okay.
Mrs. Phelps.
Phelps, yeah. She's
Whatever
still
her-
living.
Whatever her first name was, I forget.
Um,
Anyway, she was, O.D. was her husband,
right, right.
and she was the cook.
Okay.
So we got government surplus meat and potatoes and all kinds of stuff. And they cooked that stuff up for lunch. So we provided lunch in a lunchroom. I don't know if that's probably gone. But we provided lunch in the lunchroom every day. But all the other stuff was done by parents. And if the parents didn't do it, we did it. I mean, I swept this place many times. I mowed all the lawns with Mike. Mm-hmm. Mike and I were partners in business.
Yeah.
And then we had to cut back the bushes in the back. It's the first time I knew what red bugs were. Man, alive, they attacked. I thought I was dying. And they put fingernail polish on each hole in my body and sealed them in.
Well, that cafeteria is still there.
Oh, is it?
It was a library, it was a computer lab, and it was auditorium in the days when you were here, and now it's the offices of the principal, assistant principal, administrative office.
Oh, okay, I was in there.
And the front part of it, that's where the business office, part of the business office was. And so yeah, we still use all of that facility.
Well, in the past, the business office was in my office, the custodian office was in my office, the lunchroom was in my office, everything came out of my office. I did everything. I drove the school bus, I cleaned up the bathroom, I did everything. We didn't have any janitorial service. The two Snyder boys, every day their dad made them stay after school and empty all the waste baskets, take them out in the back and burn them. Those guys are here every day. They belly ached on every time, but they did it. Mrs. Sly is the person who should get the rose. She was here painting. She was here all the time. And I lived next door, so I came over and helped her, Donna, and I came over all the time. And
Now Donna played the marimba.
she played the marimba.
Did she do that some?
She did it in Hong Kong.
Okay.
She did it all over the colony in Hong Kong and played the organ and the piano.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a musician.
Tell me a little bit about when your time here was coming to a close. I'm assuming that you had been contacted about going back to Hong Kong to serve there. So explain that transition. Did you go as a missionary with the Alliance Church, or?
Here's what happened. When I knew that experience of learning how to bring people to Christ led me to start thinking I want to be a missionary. So I had several missions that were talking to me, and my father and mother had been Christian Missionary Alliance, and I could speak Chinese. So I thought it's logical for me to go to Hong Kong. I know everybody, they need missionaries, so on and so forth. So I applied to the Christian Missionary Alliance and said, you haven't been to seminary, you haven't had home service. So I said, okay, I'm a principal in a school now. They all died laughing when they heard that. And I'm going to probably leave there to go to seminary. But while I'm in Lakeland, if I start a CMA church in Lakeland, will you let me not have to do the 2-year home service? They said, you'll never start a church in Lakeland. I said, well, just tell me that if I do, can I not do home service? Because I can't sit around for I'm no good at that. That's the copy room guy for some pastor somewhere. So they said, yeah, you could, nice try, you know. So I talked to Dr. Sly. He said, you know, we're having some problems, and a lot of us would like to start a new church. And so I said, okay. So we started a Bible study. The Bible study grew to about 25 people, very influential people. And so I called the Christian Missionary Alliance. I said, I got the church going. We need a pastor. So they sent a pastor. And the pastor they selected, if they had looked for 20 years for the worst person to come and deal with the people I was dealing with, they found him. And so Dr. Sly took me for another ride, and he said, we can't have this guy. And so I wrote to the district superintendent to tell him we couldn't have this guy, and I found out the district superintendent's secretary was this guy's wife's roommate for 4 years in college. And he wrote me the most blistering letter I ever got in my life. Who do you think you are, you young blah, blah, blah. He goes, Well, everybody left. So we end up with the pastor, me, David Jones and his wife, and the 2 teachers from Toccoa, and the girl, what in the world was her name? From Chattanooga. Anyway, we were the church. I was the speaker, Donna was the piano player, the other, and pretty soon 2 people came, 4 people came, and now there's a pretty good sized Christian Missionary Alliance church here.
Yes.
And so I didn't have to do home service because I started that church. They didn't believe it. They came down, so it was a pretty good sized church when I left.
So when you got to Hong Kong, you somehow, they heard, I believe, I'm going to, you tell the story, but they heard that you had been a principal, and so they wanted you to run the Christian schools. Can you tell
Well,
me about
they
that?
thought I knew everything about schools, otherwise I wouldn't have been a principal in the United States.
Right.
Oh man. So they had all these schools. So immediately they had me teach. And after about 6 months, I was a superintendent of the biggest high school they have. I think there's like 2,500 kids in this high school. So I wasn't the principal, I was over the superintendent. Then I became superintendent of the whole shooting match. And at that time, there were like 14 or 15,000 students in the school system. It's a big school system. And that was one part of my job for many years. It was actually a small part of my big job, but it's easy. It's a lot easier to be a supervisor than it is to be a principal. Supervisor, you give orders. Principal, you got to carry them out. And so I got into the school system in Hong Kong. It's still big.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out with Mike how to have an exchange program with one of those schools.
Wow.
That'd be fun for this school.
Yes. We have some Chinese students here now. Tell me how you, the transition to the camping ministry, give that story, how that happened, and how God provided the camp for you.
That's a long story. I had been from Camp of the Woods, and I knew what camping could do for young people. When Donna and I got to Hong Kong, the refugees were escaping into Hong Kong from China, and half of the population in Hong Kong was under the age of 22 or 23 something. Enormous influx of people, millions. So I was assigned immediately to teach in a school and to work with these young people. And we found if we took them out of the resettlement blocks where they lived 6 in a room, 8 by 10 feet. And they didn't know each other when they got there because they swam to get there. Most of them, some walked over the mountains. So they're refugees. And we found they came to Christ if we took them somewhere out in the country and they could breathe fresh air and be on their own, and we loved on them. And we had so many people coming to Christ. So I decided we start a camp. And it's a very long story, but the government offered us 2 pieces of land, and they were perfect, but we needed more money to prove to them we could do the project. So finally an orphanage became available, and Billy Graham and Walt Maloon, a Floridian guy who your parents, everybody knew him, Billy Graham and he came to Hong Kong. I picked him up at the airport and asked them, and Billy Graham asked me to take him around Hong Kong. And I showed up the next day in my little Morris Minor car, and he said, I can't get in that car, so he went back in the hotel, and Walt Malone went with me. And we went to see that orphanage, and they wanted to sell it to us for $240,000, and they had just put $1.25 million into one building. It was 4 acres of land in Hong Kong, perfect place for a camp. So Walt Malone said, I'll raise all the money you need for that in 3 months. He came back, and after 3 months I got a letter from him that said, I haven't raised any money, but enclosed is a letter that you should read. So I opened this letter. It's a letter from a girl, and she said, my name is Belinda Holmes. I'm from Orlando, Florida. I'm 14 years old. I've heard you're starting a camp. Enclosed is my ice cream money of $1 for 2 weeks. Use it to buy the camp. I thought that's the worst joke anybody ever played on me, telling me he raised no money and sending me a stupid letter from some 14-year-old girl with $1 in it. And I got discouraged. I came home and my wife said to me, did you read the last line? I said, yeah. Well, what's it say? It says, use this to buy the camp. That's clear. So I went down to the guy and I said, we're ready to buy the camp. He says, which bank is the money in? I said, it's not in the bank, it's in my pocket. He says, you have $240,000 in your pocket? I said, no, but I have enough money to buy the camp. And he says, I said, read this letter. So he reads the letter. My name's Belinda Holmes. I'm from Orlando, Florida. I'm 14 years old. It's my ice cream money for 2 weeks used to buy the camp. He laughs. I said, send it to your board. He sent it to the board. We get a telegram back from the board. That girl's faith is worth giving her the place for. Give it to them for $1. We bought 4 acres of land with a dormitory for 150 or 200, I don't know how many kids it held, and an auditorium that was just built, housing for everybody, a football field, everything you'd ever want. For that little girl's $1. 10 years later, I spoke in Orlando. When I was done telling this story, a girl comes up to me, a beautiful girl, and she says, hi, Mr. Bechtel, I'm Belinda Holmes. I almost passed. I said, are you serious? He said, yeah, I am. And she was about 23 or so at that time, 22. And she's now the librarian in the Pensacola Christian School.
Wow, okay.
And we bought the camp. That camp is now 42 years old. It's had 1.4 million kids in the camp. I spoke in San Jose. I asked the people there how many, in a Chinese church, I asked them how many of them had come to Christ in the camp. 34 people stood up. I meet them all over the world that came to Christ in that camp. Anyway, I got to tell you another story about Lakeland Christian School. Don Kelso was also on the board.
Yes, sir.
Great man.
Right.
And he and Judge Welch were pilots during the war. So they decided we should rent a plane and fly to Pensacola to see the Pensacola Christian School to learn something. So Dr. Sly and I sit in the back, and Jim Welch and Don Kelso sit in the front and fly this plane. It was flopping all over the. I was sure we were never going to make it because it had been a long time since they flew their B-59 or whatever it was. So anyway, we went up there and looked around and learned a lot. Flew back here. So we were doing that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's the story of the camp. Back to the camp. And I also was in charge of planting 134 churches in Hong Kong, and I had a great time there. I retired. I didn't retire. I was hired by the Arthur DeMoss Foundation after 17 years in Hong Kong to head up their overseas international work. I did that for 24 years. I retired at age 65. I'm now 76. I've had more fun since then building facilities to train Chinese house church pastors. That's my whole life story.
Boy, that last part you summarized very quickly. That there could take hours to hear that story. You know, as you come back here to the school and you see what is going on and what God has done over the years, what thoughts come to your mind as you see what's taking place here?
despise the days of small beginning.
Yes.
Number two, faithfulness of those men early on. When we had no money at all, they second mortgaged their homes. I hope everybody hears that. Several of the men paid the staff out of their own pockets when we had no money.
Right.
People have been faithful down through the years. Mike Sly, who followed me around everywhere I went, everything I did, I couldn't get rid of him. He's now the principal here, for Pete's sake. And people like you and others were in school here. God kept you in the ball game, and look at the place now. I mean, it's one of the larger Christian schools in the country, I would say.
I can remember days when, as the business manager, we would write the paychecks and the money was not there. And we would pray, and we had devotions every day, and we would ask God to supply that need. And by the end of the day, we always had the money to be able to give to the teacher. We never missed a payday that I can remember in all those years. I know that I was here for 40 years as the business manager. I also drove the bus many, many days. We had 6 routes, and there was always a bus breaking down or a driver sick or something. And so that occupied a good bit of my time, was trying to get kids back and forth. So it was a huge blessing to no longer do the bus transportation, even though we have athletic events, and we have much newer buses, so they don't break down as much. So
well, I was here when we needed 2 buses, 2 Volkswagen buses.
Yes.
Dr. Sly and I went to the Volkswagen store, and he bought them. Unbelievable. I mean, I learned more about faith from those guys.
Yeah.
They mentored me.
It's amazing. You know, for 60 years, more than 60 years now, education in the light of God's Word has been our motto, and it still is our motto. Why is that so important in training future generations? Why is that important that we stick with that?
Well, that's the mandate. That's a biblical mandate.
Yes.
And today, I speak in secular schools once in a while about China. I'd hate to send my kid to some of the schools I've been in, because they've gone wild. There's no control of the kids. In chapel here, they sit and listen. There are 5 or 6 of them goofing off, but most of them are listening and come up to you afterwards and say thank you. And they're polite and so on. You're teaching things here that are very important. And it's gotten away from us in most of the, I don't know about down here, but up north, it's serious. So if you can keep the faith, and this school has done that, for goodness sakes, hold it to what it is now and improve it.
Yes. Well, you talked some about the board members and the part they played in your life, a big part, and I know that is such a key factor. I remember mentioning when I retired a couple of years ago and had opportunity to say a few words that I expressed appreciation to those board members and what they meant to me and their commitment to Christian education and just investing their lives here, and commitment to pray and to be at meetings and to serve. And so that trickles down to Mike and the other administrators and ultimately to the students. And so I'm very thankful for
You
that.
know, it was interesting, the diversity of those men. They weren't all from one church.
Right.
I don't think any 2 of them, or maybe 2 or 3 of them were in, but they were from all different churches, but they were all in. And when we had a board meeting, boy, they were all in. And they'd go around the room, okay, who doesn't have a second mortgage yet? You know, I mean, they really were all in. And they were a good example to all of us, to me certainly. I've never forgotten those men.
Well, I just appreciated, you know, when I was in the service, to be able to come and see you in Hong Kong, New Territories in 1973 when I was in the Navy, and that was a wonderful experience for me. I know you warned me to make sure I got off that train before at that last stop, before I went into China.
That's right.
That was not a good
They could
thing.
never get you out again.
Yeah, and I was a little nervous with the people all around me with their chickens or whatever they had, and that I would find the right place to get off. But
That's right.
it was an amazing place, and just the opportunity to visit you in the school and to hear, be at in your Bible class, I believe, that we went to, and I still have a picture of a painting that a student gave me from that day. So I really appreciate all that you've done for the school, and how you've invested your life in the gospel and taking Christ around the world, and still are doing that, and that is a real testimony to all of us.
Yeah, my retirement, I thought retiring, you don't do anything. Ravi Zacharias has me on his team now. He's got me, he thinks I'm 40 years old. I'm traveling all over the world with him. I'm teaching Chinese pastors and doing all kinds of stuff now I thought I could never do. And my retirement.
Yes.
So I'm going to keep going till I can't go any longer, and then I'll just give up. But praise the Lord for your work here. Praise the Lord for Mike and all the staff, and keep it up.
Okay.
Keep on the right page.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.